For 7 long years, a black dog named Shadow waited under an old sycamore tree, silent, unmoving, forgotten by time. No one knew what he was waiting for, until a lonely widow named Agnes brought him home. And the past began to stir. From a sealed room to a missing girl's journal hidden in the woods. What unravels is more than a mystery, it's a story of memory, loyalty, and a love that never gave up. This is not just about a dog. It's about the silence that protects, the truth that heals, and the return no one believed possible. In the quiet town of Maple Hollow, nestled at the edge of the forest, 70-year-old Agnes Monroe lived alone in a weathered wooden cottage. Her days passed in silence, just the creak of the floorboards, the wind through the pines, and the ticking of an old clock that never quite kept time. She had long accepted the stillness, had made peace with the quiet. That is, until the morning she found the black dog. It was just after sunrise when she stepped out onto her porch, cradling a chipped mug of tea. The fog still clung low to the ground, and the sycamore tree that marked the far edge of her yard loomed like a memory from a time she'd stopped visiting. That was when she saw a dog, lying motionless at the base of the sycamore. Its fur was matted, pitch black with streaks of gray, and ribs visible through its gaunt body. Around its neck, a faint ring of scar tissue, the ghost of a chain long since broken. She didn't know where it had come from. It had no collar, no signs of recent care. But when the dog opened its eyes and looked at her, something passed between them, something that made her knees weak and her heart stir. Its gaze was sorrowful, ancient, and filled with a knowing she couldn't explain. She walked down the steps slowly, careful not to frighten it. The dog didn't move. It simply watched her. She knelt beside it, despite the ache in her joints. "You've been waiting, haven't you?" she whispered. The dog gave no sound, no gesture, just silence. Something in her knew this was no ordinary stray. Without another word, she reached out her hand, and the dog lifted its head, then slowly stood. It followed her home, limping slightly, each step deliberate. It crossed the threshold without hesitation and curled beside the fireplace as if it had always belonged there. Agnes watched from her chair, one hand around her tea, the other resting on the armrest like she might reach out and touch the past. The dog lay still, its breathing slow and deep, as if it had finally found rest. "You'll need a name," she murmured. "Shadow. That's what you are. Something always there. Something that never really left." And Shadow didn't move, but his eyes flickered, just once, and then closed. Agnes didn't know it yet, but the arrival of that silent dog beneath the sycamore tree was the first note in a long-forgotten song, one that would lead her back to a room she hadn't entered in 7 years, and to a truth that had waited, quietly, in the dark. Shadow had only been in the house for 3 days, but already he moved like he belonged there, curling beside the hearth, rising without command, and staring at things Agnes hadn't looked at in years. Most nights after dinner, he would sit in the hallway just outside the last door on the right. The door Agnes had kept shut for 7 years. The door that used to be Mara's. Each time Shadow stopped there, he would let out a single, low bark, just one, and then fall silent, resting his head on his paws as if waiting for something to answer back. Agnes tried to ignore it at first. She told herself the dog was just drawn to the smell of old linen or the draft that crept under the door. But when he brought something back from the woods, mud-caked, wrapped in leaves, her world tilted. It was a necklace. Silver, delicate, with a star-shaped charm that had once shone like frost in winter light. Mara's necklace. The one she wore every day until the day she disappeared. It had never been recovered. Police said she must have lost it in the woods. But now, after 7 years, it had returned, carried in the mouth of a dog who could not speak, but somehow said everything. Agnes sat in her chair, staring at the pendant resting in her palm. Her fingers trembled. In the hallway, Shadow sat still, his gaze not on her, but on that closed door. She stood. The hallway seemed longer now, the floor creaking beneath her weight. She placed her hand on the doorknob, which turned without resistance. The door opened with a sigh. Dust floated in golden beams from the window. The room was untouched. A twin bed still made up in a blue floral quilt. A stuffed bear with a missing button eye leaned against a stack of old books. On the walls, drawings simple, childlike, of forests and stars. of a girl with curly hair, of a black dog standing beside her in the trees. Agnes stepped in, her breath caught in her throat. She opened drawers slowly, gently, like lifting stones off buried bones. In the bottom one, she found a wooden box. Inside, a hair clip, a pebble shaped like a heart, and a photo of Mara at age 12 smiling with all the brightness of someone who thought the world still made sense. And then, beneath it all, something else. A page from a journal, torn, smudged with dirt, and barely legible, but the words were still there. If I go missing, it read, it's because of the man with the shovel. Agnes sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands gripped the fabric beneath her. The room seemed to close in, the silence too loud. Shadow appeared at the door, just watching. Agnes looked at him not as a pet, but as a witness. You saw, she whispered. Didn't you? Shadow walked forward, laid his head gently against her knee. He said nothing, but she didn't need him to. The weight of his presence was answer enough. Outside, the sycamore creaked in the wind. Inside, a door once sealed by grief had finally opened, not just in the house, but in her heart. The next morning, Agnes took a different path into town. She didn't need groceries urgently, but she needed air, fresh, honest air to clear the storm building inside her. She walked slowly, past the chapel with peeling white paint, down the narrow road that once led to the old schoolyard. The sky hung low, heavy with clouds. Everything in Maple Hollow felt like it was holding its breath. As she passed the abandoned bus stop at the edge of town, she saw him. A boy, skinny, wrapped in a coat far too large for his frame, sitting on the rusted bench like someone who had nowhere else to go. His backpack sagged at his side. His hair was uncombed, his jeans muddy. But it wasn't his clothes that stopped her. It was the way he spoke, softly, to the stray dog crouched beside him. I know you miss her, the boy whispered, scratching behind the dog's ear. But I miss her too. The dog was gone in a flash when it noticed Agnes, darting off into the trees. But the boy didn't move. He didn't run or flinch, he just turned, eyes wide, caught between defiance and fear. I wasn't stealing nothing, he said quickly. I didn't say you were, Agnes replied gently. He studied her a moment, then shrugged. People think I'm weird, talking to dogs and all. Maybe dogs just listen better than people, she said. The boy smirked. They do. They don't interrupt. She sat on the edge of the bench, ignoring the cold metal against her hips. What's your name? Benji. Benjamin when teachers get mad, but I don't go to school much. Do you live nearby? Depends what you mean by live, he said, picking at a thread in his sleeve. My dad drinks. Sometimes I sleep outside. It's quieter. Agnes felt something catch in her chest. Do you come here every day? Almost. The dogs know I got snacks. I share. They come talk to me. Have you ever seen a black dog? Big, quiet, scar around his neck. Benji turned so fast he nearly dropped his backpack. You mean Shadow? I used to call him that. Agnes blinked. You named him too? He used to lay under the sycamore. Every day. Every night. All year. Even in the snow. I watched him from the hill. Agnes stared at him, stunned. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? He frowned. Nobody listens to the kid with the drunk dad. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just fact. Agnes took a deep breath. Would you like to come meet him again? Shadow's at my house now. Benji's eyes lit up not with excitement, but with something deeper. Relief, maybe. Hope. Can I bring my sketchbook? Of course. And paper? I draw better with fresh pages. I'll give you all the paper you need. And pie. He smiled for the first time. Okay, but I'm allergic to walnuts. That afternoon, when Benji stepped into Agnes's cabin, Shadow rose from the hearth and walked toward him. No bark, no growl, just quiet recognition. Benji knelt, eyes brimming. You remember me, he whispered. Shadow leaned his head into the boy's chest. Agnes stood back, watching the reunion, one stitched not by words, but by time and silent loyalty. In that moment, she stopped believing in coincidence. She started believing in purpose. It started with a draft. Agnes had begun opening the windows in Mara's old room slowly, a little more each day, as if airing out the memories could make them less painful. Shadow would sit just inside the doorway, never stepping past the frame. Benji, now a regular visitor, often lay on the floor sketching, his legs kicking back and forth as he hummed absent-minded tunes. It was Benji who noticed the edge. "There's something weird here," he said one afternoon, pointing to the far wall. The wallpaper's bubbling. Agnes walked over, fingers tracing the seam. The paper was old, faded with time, but in one spot near the corner, it had lifted slightly like a breath trapped beneath it. "Should I pull it?" Benji asked, eyes wide. She hesitated, then nodded. The paper peeled off more easily than expected, revealing something beneath it: lines, color, a swirl of green and brown. It was a mural, painted directly onto the wall, hidden for years. The brush strokes were crude, a child's hand at work, but the image was unmistakable. A girl with wild, curly hair stood beside a black dog. Behind them, a dense forest loomed. The sky was gray, but there was light on the girl's face, like hope breaking through. And beneath the figures, scrawled in crooked letters, were 4 words: "He remembers everything." Agnes stepped back, breath caught in her throat. Her hand went instinctively to her chest. The room swam slightly. Benji was the first to speak. "That's Shadow, isn't it?" She nodded slowly. "And Mara?" The memory hit her like wind through a broken window. Mara painting the wall secretly, staying up past bedtime, claiming she was making magic. Agnes had scolded her at the time, insisting walls were not canvases. But Mara had just smiled and kept painting when no one was looking. Agnes had forgotten, or perhaps she had chosen to. What if the dog in the mural is the same dog who sat under the sycamore? Benji whispered. Agnes turned to Shadow. He was sitting, perfectly still, staring at the mural, not just seeing it, but remembering it. "He didn't just wander into my yard," she said softly. "He came back." Benji stood beside her, clutching his sketchbook. "Do you think he was with her when she went missing?" Agnes didn't answer right away. She stepped closer to the mural, fingers hovering just above the painted dog's face. The scar on its neck had been painted too intentionally, deliberately. A scar that matched Shadow's exactly. "She knew," Agnes murmured. She painted the truth before she disappeared. The room fell silent again, except for the soft hum of the heater and the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Agnes felt something shift inside her, grief no longer heavy like a stone, but sharp like a blade. Shadow stood, walked over, and lay at the base of the mural. He curled up beneath it, just like he used to curl beneath the sycamore. Agnes knelt beside him. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If you remember, then maybe she's still out there." Benji looked up at her, a question on his face. "What do we do now?" Agnes didn't know. But she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't stay silent anymore. He showed up one cold Thursday morning. Agnes had just returned from the post office when she saw the man standing by her fence, tall, rugged, with a faded jacket and a hat pulled low over his brow. His truck was parked near the road, dusty and dented, the kind of vehicle that had driven too many miles and told too few truths. "You live here?" he asked, voice hoarse, southern edge to it. Agnes didn't answer right away. Shadow stood beside her, ears alert, body still as stone. "I'm looking for a dog," the man continued, eyes scanning the porch. "Big black one, scar on his neck. Had him years ago before he ran off." Agnes's heart skipped. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Clayton." He shifted his weight. "Clayton Morse." Shadow growled. It was low, almost inaudible but unmistakable. Agnes had never heard him growl like that, not once. "I'm sorry," she said, reaching for the railing. "I think you're mistaken, he's not your dog." But Clayton didn't back away. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo, creased, water-damaged. It showed a younger Shadow, perhaps thinner, standing by a chain-link fence. "He used to be mine," Clayton insisted. "Had him chained to my shed out in Fox Hollow. Good guard dog. Until one day he broke loose." Agnes glanced at Shadow. The way his body tensed, The way his gaze never left the man's hands, it was like watching a soldier recognize the uniform of an enemy. Benji appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. He sensed it too. Something was wrong. "You said Fox Hollow?" Agnes asked. "Yeah. Used to have a cabin there," Clayton said, glancing toward the trees. "Before everything went to hell." That name. Fox Hollow. It rang like a bell in Agnes's memory, loud and sour. Years ago, when Mara went missing, a neighbor had mentioned a man who lived out near that ridge. Strange, solitary. But the police had found nothing concrete. He'd vanished. Moved away before they could question him thoroughly. And now here he was, standing in her yard. "I'm gonna need the dog back," Clayton said, stepping closer. "Ain't right you keep what's mine." Before Agnes could speak, Shadow lunged not to bite, but to block. He planted himself between her and the man, hackles raised, a growl rising like thunder from his chest. Clayton stepped back quickly. "Easy now," he muttered, both hands raised. Benji, ever observant, quietly lifted his phone and snapped a photo. Not of Clayton's face, but of his hands. Later that night, Benji zoomed in on the image and showed Agnes the scar, a crescent-shaped mark just above Clayton's wrist. A bite mark. "It's old," Benji whispered, "but it matches." Agnes stared at it, her breath shallow. Shadow had bitten this man, not in fear but in defense. "I need to check something," she said, reaching for the dusty shoebox tucked beneath the couch. Inside were old folders, clippings, the original police report about Mara's disappearance. She flipped through until she found it. Witness statement. Unverified reports of an older man seen near construction site in Fox Hollow. No ID. Suspected trespassing. Description: tall, rugged, scar on right hand. Left before patrol arrived. It was him. Clayton. The man who had slipped through the cracks 7 years ago, and now returned perhaps not for the dog, but for what the dog remembered. Agnes pressed the report to her chest. The house was quiet, but her heart thundered. Shadow lay by the door, watching it like a sentry. The past had knocked. And this time, she would not let it walk away unchallenged. It began with Shadow pawing at the back door just after midnight. Agnes had drifted into a shallow sleep on the living room couch, the police report still open on her lap. The house was quiet, but Shadow was not. He paced, not frantic but purposeful. His eyes, amber and steady, locked with hers, as if calling her to follow. Agnes grabbed her coat, and without a word, Benji appeared beside her, already wearing his shoes. "Where's he going?" the boy asked. "I don't know," she said softly. "But I think it's time we listen." The night air was sharp, filled with the crisp hush that only forests know. They followed Shadow into the trees, their flashlight beams bouncing against trunks and fallen branches. The path was unfamiliar to Agnes, winding deeper than she'd ever dared go. But Shadow moved like he'd memorized every route, every bend. 20 minutes in, he stopped. They stood before what remained of a forgotten place, rusted metal beams, concrete slabs, rebar jutting like bones from the earth. An abandoned construction site, swallowed by vines and moss. Agnes recognized it. It had once been the start of a housing development in Fox Hollow, one that never got finished. Shadow walked slowly to a tree near the edge of the clearing. There, half buried in soil and leaf, was a small tin box. Agnes knelt, her hands trembling as she brushed away the dirt. The box creaked open. Inside, a worn headband, a broken pen, a page torn from a school journal. Her breath caught. Benji read it aloud. It was Mara's handwriting. "Shadow keeps following me, even when I don't want him to. He's scared. He knows something's wrong. The man with the shovel keeps watching me from the trees. I told Grandma, but she didn't believe me. I don't want to come back here anymore, but if I disappear, please tell Shadow thank you." Agnes couldn't breathe. Her knees sank into the dirt. The forest spun. Benji looked around. This was it, wasn't it? She nodded. This was where it happened. There was no blood, no bones, no finality. But there was memory, and that was enough to ignite something deeper than fear, truth. Shadow began to circle the area, stopping at a collapsed shed. He sniffed the rotting wood, then sat beside it, refusing to move. Agnes walked over, shining her light on the base. A rotted beam had collapsed, revealing a narrow crevice behind it. Inside, a faded piece of cloth floral, torn just like the dress Mara had worn the day she vanished. Tears blurred Agnes's vision. She was here, she whispered. She was really here. Benji crouched beside her. Do you think she's? Agnes shook her head, firm. No, there's no grave. No sign of death. Only of someone escaping, hiding. They sat in silence. And then, from deep in the woods, came the distant hoot of an owl, slow, echoing through the night. A sound that Mara used to mimic when she was little. It hit Agnes like lightning. She used to do that, she murmured. When she was scared. It was her signal. Benji turned his head toward the sound. Someone else is out there. But no one came. Shadow walked over, sat beside Agnes, and rested his head in her lap. His eyes didn't close. He stayed alert, guarding. The silence said everything. The forest had given them pieces. Now it was up to them to make the world listen. Maple Hollow's town hall had never been so full. Every seat was taken. Every corner buzzed with murmurs. Some came for the drama. Others came for the memory of a girl they thought long gone. But most came for Agnes Monroe, the old widow who hadn't spoken in public since her granddaughter vanished 7 years ago. Agnes stood at the podium, palms flat against the wood, the paper in her hand trembling just slightly. She hadn't slept. She hadn't rehearsed. All she had was the truth, raw and aching. Beside her sat Benji, silent, holding a worn sketchbook and a phone ready with recordings. And lying at her feet, calm as stone, was Shadow, a black dog with amber eyes who had waited longer than anyone for this moment. The mayor, an aging man with a tight tie and tighter smile, leaned toward the microphone. Mrs. Monroe, this town has moved on from tragedy. I hope you're not here to stir grief that is long. I'm not here to stir grief, Agnes interrupted, her voice stronger than she expected. I'm here to break silence. The room hushed. She took a breath. 7 years ago, my granddaughter Mara disappeared. The police concluded she wandered into the forest and died of exposure. No body was found, no proof. Just a decision made to make the headlines stop. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But now, she continued, I have proof that she didn't vanish. She was taken. She survived. And someone in this town chose to ignore it. Gasps fluttered across the hall. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. Agnes lifted the tin box and opened it for the crowd. This was found last week in the woods behind the old Fox Hollow site. Inside was Mara's handwriting, her description of a man watching her, and a name Shadow. She gestured to the dog. This is the same dog she drew, the same one who waited under the sycamore tree for 7 years, the same one who led us to her hiding place. The room grew tense. A woman in the back stood up, Principal Dwyer, retired. Her hands trembled. I remember that dog, she said. Mara used to bring sketches of him to school. She was scared, told me about someone following her. I wrote it down, but the superintendent told me not to push it, said it was family trouble. Murmurs erupted. Benji stood and pressed play on his phone. The room filled with Mara's voice, young and frightened, from her journal. If I disappear, please tell Shadow. Thank you. People turned pale. Others turned angry. Agnes raised one final piece of evidence, a printed photo of Clayton's scarred wrist. And this man, she said, came back for the dog. His story didn't match. His past lines up with a witness description from the original investigation, one the police never followed up on. A man from the local paper whispered something to his colleague. Another began typing furiously into a laptop. The room, once skeptical, now burned with energy. Juanice turned to outrage. The mayor tried to regain control. Mrs. Monroe, this is highly irregular. Agnes turned to face him. You told me to let it go. You told me there was nothing more to find. And yet she was there, all along, waiting to be remembered. A pause. Then a voice from the crowd, we want the case reopened. Another, call the state investigators. The dam had broken. A ripple turned into a wave. By the time the meeting ended, a petition had started. The sheriff was being questioned. and someone from the local news had already called a national affiliate. Agnes stepped outside into the cool evening, her legs weak but her spirit burning. Benji came to her side. "You did it." "No," she said quietly, looking down at Shadow. "He did." The dog sat at attention, gaze fixed on the darkening sky as if still watching, still guarding, still remembering. The town had finally listened. And the forest, for the first time in years, felt just a little less silent. Spring came late to Maple Hollow that year. The snow melted in patches, reluctantly, as if winter had left behind too many things unfinished. But the sycamore bloomed early, its branches stretching wide like arms remembering how to hold. Agnes sat on the porch, a blanket around her shoulders, Shadow curled at her feet as always. Benji was inside, reading aloud from a book Mara had once loved, his voice rising and falling like a quiet song. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt like a museum of loss. It breathed. Then came the knock. Soft, hesitant, the kind that didn't expect an answer. Agnes stood slowly, her knees stiff from the cold, and opened the door. There, framed by the gold light of the setting sun, was a girl thin, pale, her clothes too large and her eyes older than 19. Curls framed her face in tangled waves, and in her hand she held a piece of wood carved into the shape of a dog. "Mara," Agnes whispered. The girl blinked. And then the dog moved. Shadow rose slowly, his limbs trembling with age, but his eyes alive with recognition. He stepped toward her, nose gently touching her hand. Mara dropped the carved dog. It hit the porch floor and rolled. And suddenly the dam broke. She collapsed into Agnes's arms, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know if you'd still be here." "I never left," Agnes said, holding her as tightly as her old bones allowed. And neither did he. Inside, Benji stood frozen at the doorway, watching the impossible unfold. They sat on the porch for hours that night. Mara didn't say much at first. Just fragments. People who'd found her after she escaped. A farmhouse. A woman who taught her to read again. How she changed her name, afraid the past might find her. She'd lost time, lost trust, but not memory. Not Shadow. "He never let me fall asleep," she said softly, her hand resting on the dog's scar. "Not that night. Not until it was safe." Shadow rested his head on her knee and closed his eyes. By the time the moon rose, word had spread. The sheriff came quietly. So did reporters. But Agnes turned them all away. "This isn't a story," she said. "It's a homecoming." A month later, on the first warm day of May, the town gathered beneath the sycamore. They unveiled a small bronze statue, not of a hero on a horse, but of a dog, sitting, watching, forever waiting. At its base, a plaque read, "He never forgot, so we never will." Children touched the statue's nose for luck. Tourists took photos, but the townspeople knew the truth. That sometimes the most powerful witness is the one who doesn't speak. That some guardians don't wear badges. And that love, real love, waits without question, without sound, without end. Agnes sat quietly beneath the tree, her hand in Mara's, Benji on the other side, and Shadow at their feet at peace. He had waited, and she had come home. Thank you for staying with us through this unforgettable journey. If this story touched your heart, if it made you pause and feel something deep within, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every story we share carries a message of hope, courage, and the quiet power of love. Join us so you won't miss what comes next. Because sometimes, the voices that matter most are the ones that never speak.